let's kick off with Rishi Sunak and Scotland. If you live in Scotland, if you are a Scot, you will be, of course, finely tuned to what is or is not going on. And the latest news is this. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is on a 2-day trip to Scotland and has repeatedly refused to set out the democratic route for Scotland to hold an independence referendum. And he's told Nicola Sturgeon they must, and I quote, work together. But what does that mean, and how can they possibly do it? Do get in touch if you feel very strongly about this. 10344 499 1000. Let's discuss this with Mark Devlin, and Mark is founder of The Majority, which is a voice for Scotland's anti-nationalist majority. Hello there, thanks for joining me this afternoon. Hi there. So fill us in on what's going on, or indeed what's not going on, between Rishi Sunak and Nicola Sturgeon during this 2-day. Not sure what it's meant to be. I know it's not a holiday. They're meant to be working. What sort of work are they meant to be doing?
It's no surprise that the Prime Minister of the UK should visit Scotland. It is part of the UK, and in fact, the majority of Scots voted to remain in the UK in the independence referendum in 2014. So it shouldn't really be seen as a surprise that the UK Prime Minister visits the country. One interesting thing about this visit, I think, is that it's a little bit mundane. It's to open some green ports and to just do some general meetings around. The larger issue, or constitutional issue, has been has gone down a little bit in public perception, certainly since the Supreme Court case, which basically said that the Scottish Government didn't have the competence to run an independence referendum.
Is that what it said? It didn't have the competence to run it, or
yes,
just it could not run it?
Well, it could not run it, but I mean, technically, in lawyer speak, I suppose, it's the government doesn't have the competence to run it. It's not allowed to run a referendum.
But that's not the same use of incompetent as we might use if James Corden were ordering an omelette in a restaurant, the omelette had too much egg white in it, and he described it as incompetence. It's not the same kind of competence, is it?
It is incompetent, of course, in itself. It has, it has had many problems with incompetence. For example, the ferry scandal that you may have heard about, which with the overspent half a billion pounds on ferries that are still not floating, and there's a whole list of scandals that we could go through, and incompetence and so on. It's just daily happening up here, and unfortunately, it isn't really being highlighted by the UK press.
What would you like if you could commandeer the UK press for a couple of days? What would you put on the front page? What would you want us to know? And certainly, don't think we know enough about the unfloating ferries. I wish I knew more about that.
That's a good example. It's £500 million of wasted taxpayers' money on ferries that still don't sail. And there's another was £500 million in loan guarantees or bond guarantees given to a steel magnate, Mr. Gupta, as well. And there's a litany of scandals that the UK media could be looking at. But what they tend to do is they tend to use Nicola Sturgeon as a way to attack the UK government. She's an easy way to get a headline or a soundbite against Rishi Sunak or Boris Johnson or whoever.
Certainly is. She really delivers on that front, doesn't she?
Of course, but all that does is gives her more personal power at the expense of the people of Scotland who are actually having to suffer under this incompetence. And also she's using the independence referendum as, again, another distraction. We often say nationalism is distraction. It's a way for incompetent and lazy politicians to say, look, here's a big issue here that we're actually dealing with. Forget about all that other stuff. And the voters, sadly, too many of them have gone for that for too long.
Mark, rather than plunge in and take you on myself, why don't I do something far more useful, which is to deploy one of my wonderful callers? And on the line, I'm very glad to say, is David in Glasgow. Hello, David. Good of you to call. Good afternoon. Why don't you talk directly to Mark Devlin? I don't need to be an intermediary in this. You two can grapple with one another on the show, and we'd love to hear it. What's going on?
Exactly. Yeah. All I would say to Mark is that no government, no political institution is perfect. Everybody's got their flaws. If you look in England, the choice in England really is between Labour and Conservative. Now, in Scotland, there is that other element, which is the SNP. Now, the question that has to be asked is why, over repeated years, the SNP has been seeing high numbers of results on MSPs and MPs. Continuously, over the course of years, we see these results time and time again. And I would say it's basically because the same scenarios that I've been in is I supported Labour for pretty much all my life. And then I got to a point I thought, nothing's actually happening here. So where is the alternative? Where is something that I can go which is better for society? Now, yes, SNP's made a lot of mistakes. But if you look at the £25 child payment, for instance, if you look at the...
Well, we can talk about specific issues, but what you're basically saying is that you abandon socialism for nationalism, right? And nationalism has nothing to do with socialism. It's not about, it's not about sharing. It's about dividing. It's about it's not about the common culture between workers in Liverpool and or Hull and all across England and Wales and Scotland. It's nothing about that. It's like we'll draw a line and we'll take all the good stuff for ourselves.
Exactly.
And that's what you're doing. So you're basically what you're saying you voted for the Scottish National Party for greed. That's what you're saying.
No, I completely agree with what you're saying there, Mark. 100% agree with what you're saying. But the trouble is, in England, there is no alternative.
That's just because you think there's no alternative. Labour is in the resurgent...
Hang on, because you two are talking over one another, and I will have to referee, which I don't really fancy doing, but I will, if you don't give each other the courtesy of just speaking one at a time. Otherwise, we can't hear a word either of you are saying, so it's quite pointless. So Mark, you've accused my caller David of greed, haven't you, and of confusing...
Well, nationalism is greed.
You think nationalism is greed? Okay, nationalism with socialism. David kind of agrees with some of what you've said, but feels he's got no alternative. So, David, where does this leave you? It leaves you thinking that the best thing for Scotland to do now is simply leave the UK, and you're calling me from Glasgow. Why do you think that's the right thing for Scotland to do, or maybe the only thing?
I challenge the Conservatives and Labour to come up with a positive alternative. If Labour, for instance, come up with a positive alternative, policies which are similar to what they are in Scotland, this differentiation on the tax band so that the least well-off pay less, the child payment that we talked about, policies like that. But Labour, for a number of years, haven't done that. So people in Scotland are saying, I have an issue, where do I go? And that's why over a number of years, they've got this other alternative, this third option in Scotland, which is the SNP, and that's why they're getting voted in, because the policies are appealing to a lot of people.
All right, let's give Mark a chance to respond to that, because you set your stall
I think the policies
out clearly.
The policies are appealing to less and less people as time goes on. I think there are two camps in the SNP. There are people who want independence and who vote for the SNP for it doesn't matter who they vote, what MSPs they put forward. They'll vote for them because they want independence. That's the only goal. And they are prepared to accept the incompetence, they're prepared to accept the scandals and so on. There's other people, perhaps maybe like David, who think that the SNP can somehow manage Scotland better. But it's pretty clear that these incompetent people and, one issue people cannot actually make good laws and make good policies for the whole of the UK, for the whole of Scotland. And that's becoming more and more apparent. Every day we see more and more people leaving the SNP, being upset with them, being upset with Nicola Sturgeon and saying, no, she's not giving us independence, she's giving us these terrible policies. And at a certain point, people start to look back and say, well, wait a minute, Labour are in the resurgence in the UK. Why is that? And then they start to think, okay, well, maybe there's something there, because this SNP is a dead end. It's a dead end party. It's not going to go, it's never going to get
David, do you want to pitch in quickly? You can, if you like.
Yeah, just one very simple point in this. We've got the national election coming up pretty shortly, and potentially the Scottish Parliament elections coming up pretty shortly. Yeah. So somebody like Mark in his position, what is his answer going to be if those results show a high level of support again for the SNP?
All right, good question. Mark, what's your response going to be?
That's not actually the issue here. What Nicola Sturgeon is setting it out to be the next general election is this what they call de facto referendum, right? Where the idea is that if she gets more than 50% of the vote, something that has never actually happened, then that somehow that's going to mean that Scotland can declare itself independence. This is a fantasy plan. It's idiotic. It doesn't make any sense at all. And now we're getting to the point where insiders in the party, including people, the MPs in Westminster, whose jobs are basically being put up for grabs by Sturgeon, are beginning to say, well, no, this isn't a good plan at all. They're desperate, increasingly desperate, because they have no route to independence at all. And a party that has no route to independence, SNP, it just cannot continue beyond that.
Well, thank you both. I would like to thank my caller. I'd like to thank you, Mark Devlin, as well. If you're in Scotland, if you're a Scot, if you're thinking about this all the time, or you're trying not to think about it at all, give us a call 03444 991 1000, and I'll be straight back with you after this.